Wide Web. Welcome back to HWWS WebTV's Hanging with Web show. I'm GW Pomacher, and we're so glad you're here. We want you to come back. So hit subscribe, smash the bell, come back. We've got artists, authors, filmmakers, musicians, creative minds of all kinds. Right now, we are hanging out with Hanging with Web show alumnus, author, and good friend D.L. Havlin. Among other things, he is the author of Escaping Skeletons. But we've got, DL's got a lot of work out there, and it's been a while since we had him in the chair. I think it's been about a year.
Just about a year.
That's right. So we're going to catch up, and you get to hang out with us while we do it. So just buckle up, because DL's a lot of fun. DL, what do we got here? Escaping Skeletons.
Escaping Skeletons, and it's one of my historical novels. Mm-hmm. And it's based on one of the things that a lot of people think they know a lot about and actually don't know the whole story.
You have a lot of fun with those stories.
Don't I?
You really do. You have a lot of fun taking things that are, they're kind of obscure historical facts that we know this tiny piece of, and you just explode it all over the place and take it in a direction. Yeah, I love it. It's great. So, all right. So where are we going with this one?
Well, back at the end of the war in 1945, there was a real struggle to try to smuggle out the Nazi scientists, the Werner von Brauns, the people that worked with the Manhattan Project.
Operation Paperclip.
Operation Paperclip, and that's what this is about. But it's about the parts that are the less known part. This is the part where a lot of those Nazi operatives ended up escaping with the scientists and actually ended up in parts of South America, primarily in Argentina and in Paraguay.
Wow.
And the reason why was there was a lot of pro-Nazi sentiment. The Perones were big Nazi supporters. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the people who provided a lot of the intelligence and helped a lot of these Nazi scientists escape was a fellow by the name of Otto Skorensky. And Otto was the guy that had the flight that went in and was called the Eagle Flight, mm-hmm. that extracted Mussolini after he had been forced to abdicate and was smuggled out of Italy and put back in power by Hitler in late 1943 when the Allies invaded mm-hmm. Italy. Well, he ended up being Eva Perón's bodyguard after the war.
Wow, yeah, there are so many connections between South America, the South American continent, particularly, as you say, Argentina, Brazil, and Nazi Germany, and so much so I know that the people remember early exposure to that idea came in the late 1970s with books like Boys from Brazil, and again, fictional novels dealing with factual people.
Yeah, it's amazing how many Nazis escaped. It's estimated that roughly 6,000 actually made the journey and eventually ended up in South America. You would be surprised if you knew some of the major names that ended up in Washington, D.C.
Yes, I probably would. But I don't know how I would probably be shocked more than surprised.
Yes.
Because, especially now, because in modern days, we're learning a lot more about that transition, people who ended up in the United States. Werner von Braun was the most famous, I think, paperclipper because he went on to have a very public life. But the lesser known paperclippers were very prominent in American society, and somebody like von Braun is arguable as to whether he was a dedicated Nazi or not, or what, because again, he was dedicated to the science. He'd mm-hmm. wear whatever pin you gave him, as long as you gave him money to go with it and the ability to build a rocket. But that had an undertone to it, though, because you didn't know where he really stood as a person.
That, GW, you're so astute, because a lot of people miss all the uncovering information that's coming out, and we really need to be able to really absorb that, because a lot of it affects what's happening to us today in our lives.
Well, we build these people into these grand hero figures. Von Braun is a hero of so many, especially here. We're on the Space Coast right now.
Absolutely.
Von Braun is a hero of so many people. And when you heap that kind of responsibility on someone that's no longer with us without knowing who the person was, you're setting yourself up for a kind of failure, aren't you? Because when you find out, I mean, we know that von Braun was a Nazi. It's arguable, was he dedicated? Was he just wearing the pin to get his money? We don't know. And when we don't know, that means there's a lot of room in here.
That's right.
To build.
And I think one of the things that you have to remember is that you had a lot of people that came over that played prominent parts and sort of just absolutely disappeared. One of those people was a gentleman who worked with the Heavy Water Project. That was one of the attempts from the Nazis to build the atomic bomb. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting in the fact that in late 45, the estimates to complete the Manhattan Project were as late as March 1946. After the war, after the collapse of the Nazis in May and their rapid removal to the States, all of a sudden we were blowing up the bomb in August. Mm-hmm. So you can see that there was just a couple of key pieces of information that were added. I don't think it was the major things that some people say, but that was something that greatly enhanced it. And you have to understand.
Small puzzle piece in there.
Right.
The question is, DL, and I know you've done the research on this stuff, a lot of it. The question is, for that tiny puzzle piece, that little puzzle piece we needed to get to our next step, what did we trade? How big an impact? How big an impact did those people have, not just on that puzzle piece, that helped us.
Yes.
But how big an impact did they have on our society?
And that is the subject of escaping skeletons. It really tells it tries to answer the question, is the deal with the devil worth it? Mm-hmm. And that's basically what we had there. Mm-hmm. And it's based on an actual occurrence. There was archaeological digs in Misiones province in northeastern Argentina. And they were actually compounds that the Nazis built to move into. There were all kinds of things. There was actually in one part of the country, a nuclear research laboratory established. So, wow, like you say, it was a deal with the devil. And this tells the story. The reason why it's so interesting, GW, is that a lot of us forget basic history and we just accept things we're told. In late April and May, all of the area around Berlin was in the hands of the Soviet Unions. And these scientists, these hundreds of scientists, particularly there was 104 that were the prominent ones that they wanted to get out, were right close to Hitler in that area. And there had to be, you put yourself in the position of the U.S. where the OSS is trying to get these out of a hostile environment. The Soviets, by this time, it was really a hostile environment. So what ended up?
And they were cherry picking the people they wanted.
They were trying to get the ones that they wanted. But there was a guy by the name of Wild Bill Donovan, and Donovan was the head of the OSS. He was the guy who spirited them out. And he worked with two key people that just mysteriously disappeared. One reappeared, and the other one, I really can't say where he is. But the one that disappeared was Otto Scarenzi. He was in the SS. And the other guy was Heinrich Müller. Heinrich Müller was the head of the Gestapo for all of Germany and all the Nazi movement. And he was never tried. He disappeared. And there was a deal made there.
And interestingly enough, guys, and you guys want to check out Escaping Skeletons and get some of the real detailed history that I know DL always brings. But it's interestingly enough, and we tend to forget it again. We forget our history sometimes. We get stuck in what is accepted, even if it's not known. Mm-hmm. And we sometimes forget it was more than 40 years between the announcement of Hitler's death and the Soviets releasing materials to try to prove that. 40 years, and the materials didn't prove it.
Right, they were actually from a female skull.
That's right. So it took 40 years for the Soviets to release bad information, and yet still it is accepted by most of us that Hitler died in that bunker. But there is more than enough evidence to show. I did recently see a documentary showing at least 3 different escape routes. At least 3 different escape routes and at least 3 different destinations, all, by the way, in South America.
And there's, by the way, there's a picture that I came across that, according to the people that presented it, it has never been retouched or photoshopped. But Eben Braun and himself in a hotel called the Cordoba there.
Saw that photograph. Yes.
And the bottle of wine is 1947.
Yep.
You know, I don't know.
There's,
no one really knows.
Also, another interesting piece of photograph that was tampered with, but it was tampered with on purpose because it was actually released by the United States FBI. It was released to investigators doing North American investigations of an aged up Hitler to be on the lookout for. So as that was, I think, in the 1950s, early 1950s. Yeah. So the FBI actually was secretly looking for him as late as the 1950s, for certain, and then probably beyond. But that's amazing. And you dug in and saw so many of these stories that were interconnected, and you know the impacts that these people may have had even on world events today. And I say that because I'm going to ask you the next question a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but even though it's tongue-in-cheek, you've done the math. So you can ride the fence a little better than anybody else, DL. Was there an attempt, is there an attempt for a Fourth Reich?
There was, definitely. That was, in fact, these compounds were all set up to try to develop that, and there just wasn't enough support financially, and there wasn't enough numerically to be able to support that kind of a movement. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there probably some kind of movement today? Yeah, but
well, there's always a small movement over on the side. But
the serious movement is what you're talking about.
Yeah, because I know that you know Hitler's plan and Hitler's immediate group. Okay, Hitler and Himmler and are prominent names. The Third Reich was to last 1,000 years, but they were all methodical people, very methodical.
Yeah.
And so there would have been something in place that if the Third Reich falls, the birth of the Fourth Reich would be immediate.
Yes.
Because in order for the same people to be in charge, we can't wait a day. Because if we wait a day, someone else is going to come along and cop the idea.
One of the things that's really interesting is how I came across this story originally to GW. I had done several Second World War books, and one of the people that I met down in Naples, Florida, was a gentleman, and this is 10, 15 years ago, but he still had a tattoo on his arm. He had been in the death camps and was a survivor. But he had told me that a lot of the people that he had seen in the camp, he had seen in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
After the war, several years after the war, because he had some association with the government. But these were people that got out through Paperclip.
And just as a matter of reference for everybody out there on YouTube, so you guys can look up some of this stuff that DL's talking about, because it's all out there for you.
It is.
It wasn't until the late 1960s, early 1970s that the concept of a Nazi hunter became accepted. That means that from 1946, roughly 1945, 1946, through the end of the 1960s, there were 20 years when nobody at all outside of governments was actually looking for these guys. It wasn't until, what, 1970s when the Nazi hunters became...
Simon Wiesenthal and his groups, yeah, they really the 70s, the late 70s, 80s was the heyday of that. If you remember
Yeah.
the
Well, they were
the
announcing
trial in Israel.
every
and-
time they
yeah.
found one, they would announce it in the papers and things. But that didn't come until 30 years.
Yeah.
So there was 20 to 30 years of just free time for these guys to embed themselves around the globe.
That's exactly right.
So these stories are coming out. It's amazing. You know what that card means, DL. She does it to us all the time.
Absolutely.
So we're going to listen to her, but thank you so much. Guys, we want to thank our friends at Famous Faces and Funnies, Josh Bauer at J. Bauer Art for all the art on our set, Hearts Helping Others of Central Florida, Space Coast Comics, Brevard Film and Talent, Mommy and G Creations for all of our merchandising, and thank you for subscribing, for following, for being notified, for never missing out on who we're hanging with next.
One of the things I'd like to
Yes.
say, I really want to thank you, GW, for having me and for putting on such a fine, fine media event.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate you, DL. We appreciate all of our authors, and it's so good to see you all again. All right. Thank you, DL. Have a good one, my man. You guys stay safe, subscribe, log on, tune in, see who we're hanging with next.
All right.